All right, ready to dive into some news?
Always. I feel like every day brings a new wave of things to think about.
Absolutely. And that's what we're here for, right? To wade through it all and see what sparks our curiosity.
You know me, always up for a good, thought-provoking deep dive.
All right, so first up, we're heading over to the University of Delaware. The American Philosophical Association is celebrating a big anniversary there.
Oh, right, their 50th. Wow, 50 years, that's quite the milestone.
It is, isn't it? Makes you think about how philosophy as a field has evolved over the decades.
Absolutely, especially in academia, as it become more prominent, more specialized. I'm curious to see how they're reflecting on these past 5 decades.
Yeah, and what kind of questions philosophers are tackling today? Are they still pondering the same age-old dilemmas, or has the world, with all its tech advancements and social shifts, changed the game?
I'd imagine it has, at least to some degree. Like, how can you ignore the impact of AI on discussions about consciousness or the influence of social media on our understanding of ethics? It's all intertwined.
Okay, well, let's shift gears a bit to a topic that unfortunately never seems to get old. Presidential power. This article we have digs into the history and ethics of presidential pardons.
Ah, always a fascinating and often controversial subject.
Exactly, especially considering how pardons have been used in recent administrations.
Right. It really sparks that debate about forgiveness versus justice. When is a pardon justified and when does it feel like, I don't know, an overreach of power or a way to skirt accountability?
Yeah, the limits of executive power, right. And what role forgiveness should even play in our legal system. It's tricky.
It is really tricky. It's a delicate balance.
Speaking of tricky balances, get this. A philosopher is creating an AI language model based on his own work.
Really, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's called eSchwitz, after the philosopher Erich Schwitzgebel.
So essentially, he's trying to see if AI can capture the essence of philosophical thought, right?
Yeah, I mean, can a machine truly grasp those complex ideas, the nuance, the critical thinking? Schwitzgebel even tested his AI with questions about his work. Some were straight from his writings, others more like speculative, things he hadn't directly addressed.
What were the results?
Well, eSchwitz did surprisingly well on those core concepts, stuff directly from Schwitzgebel's work. But predictably, it struggled with the more nuanced or speculative questions. But here's the kicker. The AI came up with its own creative ideas, even went so far as to suggest rituals for a whole new religion based on Schwitzgebel's philosophy.
Wow, that's pretty wild. Kind of makes you laugh, but also kind of makes you think, right?
Yeah, like, are we heading towards a world where AI can not only think like us, but also potentially outthink us?
Exactly. And what are the ethical implications of that, especially as AI gets even more sophisticated? Definitely a lot to unpack there. All right, what's next on our list?
This one hits a bit closer to home, I think. It's about the USCCB, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, suing the Trump administration over a freeze on refugee funding.
Ah, that's a tough situation. Always a delicate balance when religion and government policy intersect.
You got that right. The USCCB is arguing that this funding freeze is unlawful and preventing them from carrying out their mission to help refugees.
I see. So at its core, this case is about, what, religious freedom, the ability of faith-based organizations to operate without government interference.
Yeah, and of course you have the other side of the argument, the whole separation of church and state principle.
Right, the debate about whether religious organizations should even receive government funding at all. I mean, there are valid points on both sides, aren't there?
Absolutely makes for a very complex legal battle. It's not just abstract principles, though. There are real people, vulnerable people, caught in the middle.
Yeah, it highlights how these debates have real-world consequences, makes you consider the role of faith-based organizations in society and how they navigate that sometimes tricky relationship with government.
Okay, now for a story that's, well, a bit out of this world, literally. It's about an asteroid that caused quite a stir back in 2023 because, there was that possibility of it colliding with Earth.
Oh, I remember that. Lots of doomsday predictions flying around back then.
Yeah, well, this blog post takes a different angle. The author connects this asteroid to the prophecy of Wormwood from the Book of Revelation. The star that falls from heaven, bringing all that destruction.
Interesting. So it's looking at a modern-day scientific event through the lens of ancient scripture.
Exactly. Makes you think about how humans have always sought to understand and maybe even find meaning in these seemingly cataclysmic events, whether through science or religion or maybe even both.
Right, like do those perspectives have to be mutually exclusive? Can they coexist? Can they even inform each other?
Big questions, right? For some people, I'd imagine these events might even challenge their core beliefs about the universe and their place in it.
Absolutely, and there's not always an easy or comforting answer, is there?
Not always, no.
It's funny you mentioned how people try to make sense of events. That reminds me of this museum exhibit we have in our notes about Margaret Cavendish.
Oh yeah, the 17th century philosopher, scientist, and author. quite the trailblazer.
Absolutely. Imagine being a woman during that time and not only delving into philosophy and science, but publishing your work in English.
Bold move, for sure. The exhibit explores how she challenged those intellectual norms of the time.
And she did it all while advocating for women's education and participation in intellectual life. It really makes you appreciate how far we've come and how far we still have to go.
It definitely does. What do you think is the most important lesson we can take away from Cavendish's story?
I think it's about the power of pursuing knowledge across disciplines, no matter what anyone else says. Like Cavendish, we should be curious and challenge those expectations.
And not be afraid to be the first to forge a new path.
Exactly. Speaking of pushing boundaries, let's jump to the 2024 Popper Prize in the Philosophy of Science. It was awarded to two academics, Franklin and Seifert.
What do they do?
They connected molecular structure to the measurement problem in quantum mechanics. It's pretty groundbreaking stuff.
I have to admit that sounds pretty complex.
It is, but the takeaway is that their work could change how we understand the physical world at its most fundamental level.
Whoa. Okay. So even the stuff we can't even see, like molecules, is somehow connected to these big mysteries in quantum mechanics.
It seems so, yeah. And that connection could lead to new discoveries in both fields. It's a reminder that everything is connected, even in science.
I like that. Everything is connected. Which reminds me of this really poignant blog post we have. It's by a philosopher reflecting on his father's passing.
Oh, wow. That's got to be a tough one to write.
It is, but it's also beautifully written. The author explores those universal themes of memory and legacy. How even though someone is physically gone, they live on in our memories and the stories we share about them.
It makes you think about those we've lost and how they shaped us.
Yeah, and about how we, in turn, shape the world around us.
Exactly. Our actions have a ripple effect long after we're gone. What kind of ripple do you want to leave behind?
That's a deep question. All right, ready for something a bit more global in scope?
Hit me with it.
All right, so this book, Regions and Powers, dives into the world of international relations. It looks at how regional security dynamics influence global power.
Okay, I'm listening.
Well, the authors make this distinction between great powers, which are powerful in their region, and superpowers, which has global influence.
Ah, I see. So like the U.S. is considered a superpower, right?
Exactly. And the authors argue that if we want to understand the complex web of international relations, we need to zoom in and understand those regional power struggles first. Then we can see how they fit into the bigger global picture.
I like that. It's like looking at the individual pieces of a puzzle before trying to assemble the whole thing.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The authors propose this scenario where the U.S. might eventually give up its superpower status.
Wait, really? So no more global policemen?
Not necessarily. One scenario they explore involves the U.S. focusing more on consolidating power in its own region, the Americas, and less on global dominance.
So a shift from superpower to great power.
Right, and it makes you wonder, what would that mean for the global balance of power? Would we see a rise in multipolarity with several centers of power competing for influence? Or would a new superpower emerge to fill the void?
Lots of potential scenarios to consider.
Now, I want to touch on a few shorter pieces we have here. These are more like ethical dilemmas we're grappling with as a society.
All right, what kind of dilemmas?
Well, one is about the fear of men that's emerged, especially after the #MeToo movement.
Oh yeah, that's a sensitive topic for sure.
The article explores the nuances of this fear, recognizing, of course, that the #MeToo movement has been vital in addressing sexual harassment and assault, but also acknowledging that some men feel anxious about being falsely accused or judged unfairly.
I can see that. It's a tough situation to navigate.
And I think the challenge is to find that balance, right? A way to address the very real concerns of both men and women.
What's the next dilemma?
This one looks at the ethics of space mining.
Ah, yes. As we venture further into space, new frontiers bring new ethical questions, don't they?
Exactly. Think about it. If we start mining asteroids for resources, who owns those resources? How do we prevent environmental damage out there? Do we even have the right to exploit space for our own gain?
It's like the Wild West all over again, but on a cosmic scale. We definitely need to develop some ethical guidelines before we get too carried away with space exploration.
Last one I want to mention is about boredom.
Boredom, really? That seems a bit mundane compared to space mining and global power shifts.
I know, right? But there's a quote in this piece by William James. He said, "Boredom results from being attentive to the passage of time itself." And it made me think about how our perception of time influences our choices and values.
How so?
Well, if we're constantly aware of time slipping away, are we more likely to make impulsive decisions? Prioritize short-term gratification over long-term goals.
That's an interesting point. Maybe our relationship with time and our own mortality shapes our ethical framework more than we realize.
It's all connected, right?
It seems so, yeah. Even boredom.
It's like a common thread running through all these stories, challenging the status quo. whether it's Cavendish breaking barriers in the 17th century or these philosophers grappling with AI in the 21st.
Pushing those boundaries, and sometimes even blurring them, like that asteroid story, blending science and biblical prophecy.
Yeah, it makes you realize that we humans have been trying to understand these big events, the things that shake us to our core, for centuries. Whether through science or religion, we're searching for explanations, for meaning.
Absolutely, and sometimes those explanations come from unexpected places. We find ourselves drawing connections between ancient texts and modern scientific discoveries.
It's like that philosopher's reflection on his father's passing. So personal, so specific, yet it speaks to these universal experiences of loss, memory, legacy.
It reminds us that even though someone might be physically gone, their presence remains in our lives, in the memories we hold.
And those memories, those stories, they become part of our own legacy. It's like a ripple effect.
Absolutely, and it makes you consider, what kind of ripple do you want to create in the world? What do you want to leave behind?
Lots to ponder there. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what are some of your key takeaways? What's sticking with you?
It's that interconnectedness that keeps coming up, the way these seemingly disparate stories, from AI to space mining to reflections on mortality, all weave together. It's a tapestry of human experience.
I like that, a tapestry. It's a reminder that even amidst all the noise and chaos of the daily news cycle, there are these deeper connections, these threads that bind us together.
And as we navigate this complex world, I think it's important to keep seeking out those corrections, to keep asking those tough questions, and to remain open to new perspectives.
Couldn't agree more. And to our listeners, we encourage you to do the same. Keep exploring these topics. Keep diving deep. Who knows what you might discover. Until next time.